In 1847, a Pennsylvania farmer lost his barn to a lightning strike on a Tuesday night. By Saturday evening, a new one stood in its place, raised by 80 neighbors who showed up without being asked. No phones, no contracts, no invoices. Just men with axes, women with kettles, and children running buckets from the well. Number 14 on this list was so dangerous that one wrong move could kill 3 men at once. And number 3, researchers just discovered it is why some 180-year-old barns still stand while modern pole buildings collapse in 20 years. These were not just construction projects, they were the social glue that held rural America together. Hit subscribe because what your great-great-grandfather knew about community might be the most important lesson this country ever forgot. Let's start the countdown with number 20. Number 20, the church bell and tin horn signal. Across 19th century America, when a farmer needed help, he did not make phone calls. He climbed up to the bell or sent a son galloping with a tin horn slung on a leather strap. In Pennsylvania Dutch country, 3 long blasts at dawn meant a raising. In New England, the meeting house bell could carry 6 miles on a still morning. By 1850, county records show neighbors expected to drop everything for a raising at least twice a year. Children stopped chores. Women set bread to rise. Men sharpened broadaxes and packed wedges. The sound reached farms 10 miles out, and within hours, wagons appeared at the gate. Diaries from Lancaster County recall fathers saying you did not need a written invitation. The horn was the invitation, and ignoring it meant your own barn might stand alone next time it burned. That call was the first thread of the community fabric. Before lumber, before any work began, the sound itself was the promise that nobody in farming country built anything alone. Number 19, pre-cutting timbers in the quiet of winter. Long before raising day arrived, the host farmer spent winter months alone in the woods with his broadaxe. After the first hard frost in November, when the sap had dropped and the timber cut cleanest, he felled oak and hemlock, dragged the logs home on a stone boat, and shaped them in the snow. Each beam was hewed square with a broadaxe, then notched with mortise and tenon by hand. A 30 by 40 barn frame required roughly 150 individual timbers, each one fitted to its match before raising day. By February, the entire skeleton lay on the ground in pieces, marked with Roman numerals chiseled into the wood, I, 2, 3, on every joint. These were not construction marks, they were a map. Come raising day, men who had never seen the timber could read those numerals and know exactly which beam connected to which post. The host's lonely winter labor was the gift that made the one-day raising possible. 40 hours of solitary work that turned 80 hands into a single working machine when the horn sounded. Number 18, the trestle table feast. Before the first beam was lifted, sawhorses were dragged from every shed within walking distance and topped with barn doors laid flat. These makeshift tables stretched 40, 60, sometimes 80 feet across the yard. Pennsylvania Mennonite records from the 1860s describe single raisings that seated 150 people in 2 shifts. The tables themselves became the social heart of the day. Workers ate in waves while others kept building. A man might come down from the roof, eat a half pound of ham, drink a quart of cold buttermilk, and climb right back up. The food itself was staggering. Schnitz und Knepp, chicken pot pie, shoofly pie, sausage, sauerkraut, mountains of mashed potatoes, 3 kinds of bread. Women baked for 2 days straight before the raising. No worker ever paid for a meal at a raising, and no woman ever sent a man back to work hungry. That trestle was the dining room of an entire township, and it appeared in 3 hours and disappeared in 1 hour. Number 17, the Mason marks and hex signs. On the beams of a Pennsylvania barn raised in 1847, you can still find 6 pointed stars carved into the king post and tulips painted on the gable ends. These were not decoration alone. Pennsylvania Dutch hex signs and German mason marks served as identification. Each carpenter cut his own personal symbol into the timber he had shaped. A crow's foot, a diamond, 3 diagonal slashes. Come raising day, when 80 men assembled timbers cut by 20 different hands, the marks told them which crew had made which piece. A Smithsonian survey of barns, built between 1820 and 1880, found over 1,200 distinct mason marks across just 3 Pennsylvania counties. The hex signs themselves carried older meaning. Distelfink for happiness, tulips for faith, 12 pointed stars for the months of fruitful labor ahead. Painted on the gable for the whole valley to read, they told travelers whose barn they passed. We have replaced this with stamped lumber serial numbers nobody reads. The hex signs were a community signature, and every man who lifted that beam knew exactly whose name was inside the joint. Number 16. The Water Boy Brigade. Every raising needed an army of children, and water duty was the first job a farm boy ever held. A 9-year-old with 2 tin pails could keep 12 men working without slowing them down. By 1860, German Reformed church records describe water boys running roughly 25 trips a day between the well and the work site, each pail weighing close to 20 pounds. The job was so essential that boys who served well at one raising were called for the next. A reputation as a fast water boy followed a child for years. Older boys graduated to running tools, sharpening axes on the grindstone, fetching wedges and pegs from the timber pile. Girls carried trays of biscuits and refilled pitchers of switchel, a molasses and vinegar drink that kept men hydrated in August heat. This was not make work. It was an apprenticeship. A boy of 10 had seen 3 barns raised before he could read. By 15, he could hew a beam. By 20, he was on the roof. The water bucket was the first rung of a ladder that ran from childhood to manhood. Number 15. The Stone Foundation Crew. 2 weeks before any timber went up, a smaller crew of 6 or 8 men gathered to lay the foundation. Stones were quarried from the host's own fields, hauled in by ox sled, and dry stacked into walls 4 feet thick. No mortar, no concrete, just gravity and skill. A good foundation man could read a rock the way a carpenter read a beam, turning each one until it locked with the next. Pennsylvania field reports from the 1850s show that a properly laid dry stone foundation could hold a 60-ton barn frame steady for 2 centuries with no settling. The work was brutal. Stones weighed 80 to 300 pounds each. A man's hands were raw by sundown. But the foundation crew set the tone for everything above. If the sills were level, every joint above them would fit. If they were off by even half an inch, the whole frame would fight itself for the next 200 years. That advance crew never got the cheers when the bents went up. Their work was buried under timber by the time the horn sounded. But every man at the raising knew the foundation crew had carried the load that nobody saw. Number 14, the pike pole bent raising. Here is where things get dangerous. A bent was a complete cross-section of the barn frame, assembled flat on the ground, and then raised vertical by sheer manpower. A single bent could weigh 4,000 pounds. 20 men with 20-foot pike poles, wooden shafts tipped with iron spikes, would set their poles against the timber and walk it up off the ground, inch by inch. One wrong step, one slipped pole, and the entire bent could come crashing back. In 1864, a barn raising in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania, killed 3 men when a pike pole snapped mid-lift and the bent rolled. Insurance records from rural townships in the 1870s list raising accidents as the second leading cause of farm injury, death after wagon falls. The boss carpenter shouted every move: raise, hold, walk it, set the foot. Men strained until veins stood out. If a man slipped, the man next to him took the whole load. The bent raising bonded men in a way nothing else could. You trusted the man on the pike pole next to you with your life, and he trusted you. When that bent came vertical and the pins dropped into the sill, every man knew he had just held death in his hands and walked away. Number 13, the boss carpenter. Every raising had one man in charge, and his word was final. He stood in the center of the work site with a wax tablet, calling out which bent went up next, which timbers needed adjustment, which men should move where. The job paid roughly 50 cents a day in 1850, more than a farmhand, but less than a blacksmith. What he sold wasn't labor, it was authority. A good boss carpenter could orchestrate 80 untrained men into a single working organism. He had memorized every joint in the frame before raising day. He knew which post was off by 1/8 of an inch and which peg would need to be driven harder. Diaries from Ohio Mennonite communities describe boss carpenters with reputations that traveled 3 counties. Hiring the right one meant a barn that stood 200 years. Hiring the wrong one meant correction work for the next decade. The boss carpenter was the conductor, and the timbers were his orchestra. Without him, 80 men with broadaxes were just a mob. With him, they raised a building before sundown that would outlive their grandchildren. Number 12, the Women's Kitchen Brigade. While men hauled timber, women ran a parallel operation no less coordinated. By dawn, the host's kitchen was packed with 20 to 30 women, each one assigned a station. One worked the bread oven, one churned butter, one peeled potatoes, one tended the smokehouse for ham. By 7 a.m., the smell of frying bacon and brewing coffee carried across the worksite. Mennonite women's diaries from the 1870s described the kitchen as a second job site, every bit as choreographed as the timber work outside. A raising for 80 men required roughly 40 pounds of meat, 60 loaves of bread, 25 pies, and 30 gallons of cider or switchel. Most of it was prepared in the host's single wood-fired range. Women rotated through hot work and cold work to avoid heat exhaustion. The eldest woman, often the host's mother or mother-in-law, ran the kitchen with the same authority the boss carpenter ran the frame. When a man came in for water, he was handed a plate and sent back out fed. The kitchen brigade was the engine that kept the entire raising running. Number 11, the gin pole and block tackle. For the tallest lifts, when men with pike poles could not reach high enough, the gin pole came out. This was a single straight tree, often 40 feet long, set upright with guy ropes radiating in 3 directions to keep it stable. A block and tackle, a system of pulleys with a long manila rope running through them, was rigged at the top. With the right pulley system, 6 men on the rope could lift 2,000 pounds straight up. The mechanical advantage was the secret. A 4-sheave block could multiply pulling force by a factor of 8. Engineering historians traced gin pole designs in American barn raising back to medieval European cathedral construction. The same physics, the same ropes, the same principles. A barn raising in upstate New York in 1855 used a gin pole and tackle to lift the entire ridge beam, 36 feet long and 800 pounds, in a single coordinated pull. We now pay $2,000 to rent cranes that do less than what 6 men with rope and pulleys did for free. Number 10, the wooden peg system. Not a single iron nail held a traditional barn frame together. Every joint was secured with wooden pegs, called tree nails or trunnels. These were hand-shaped from dense hardwood, usually oak or locust, and driven into pre-drilled holes through both members of a mortise and tenon joint. A typical 40 by 60 barn used 600 to 800 trunnels, each one cut by hand. The reason was not a shortage of nails. By 1840, cut nails were cheap and widely available. The reason was performance. Wooden pegs flex with the wood. They swell with humidity, shrink with drought, and breathe with the building. Iron nails rust, split the timber, and work loose. A study at Penn State examined 47 barns that had stood for over 150 years. Every single one was pegged. Every barn that had failed at the joints was nailed. Modern engineers are now copying this exact technique for high-end timber framing because it outlasts steel fasteners by an order of magnitude. 800 wooden pegs, driven in by men in a single afternoon, held a barn together for 200 years. Number 9, the shingle splitting station. While the frame went up, a separate crew worked the shingle station. Cedar bolts, 2-foot chunks of straight grain, cedar log, were split with a froe. An L-shaped iron blade struck with a wooden mallet. A good shingle splitter could produce 1,000 shingles a day, each one tapered, smooth, and ready for the roof. A 40 by 60 barn needed roughly 6,000 shingles to cover the roof, which meant 6 men at 6 stations could supply the entire roof in a single day. The work looked easy, and it was anything but. Reading the grain of the cedar was the skill. Hit the bolt wrong, and the shingle ran out, ruining the piece. Hit it right, and it peeled off like a sheet of butter. Shingle splitters were often older men whose shoulders couldn't take pike pole work anymore. They sat on chopping blocks in the shade, working in a steady rhythm, while their sons hauled the finished bundles to the roof. The cedar shake station was the music of the raising. Tap, tap, crack, all day long. 40 years later, the same froe would still be in the tool shed, waiting for the next generation to hear that rhythm again. Number 8, the bent assembly on the ground. The genius of barn raising was that bents were assembled flat on the ground first, then raised vertical as complete units. This meant the most precise joinery, fitting mortise and tenon, driving the pegs, squaring the angles, was done at ground level where men could work safely with both feet on dirt. A typical barn had 4 to 6 bents spaced 10 feet apart. Each one was laid out, fitted, pegged, and squared before the first one stood up. The pegs were driven on the ground because driving a peg accurately from a height of 20 feet was nearly impossible. By assembling on the ground first, the host had reduced the dangerous overhead work to one task: connecting horizontal beams between standing bents. Engineering reviews of timber framing have called this the most efficient construction method ever devised for unpowered labor. 20 men could assemble a bent in 90 minutes. Then 60 men could raise it. Then they could move on to the next. The system was so good, it has never been improved upon, only replaced by machines. Number 7, the calling off signal system. During the dangerous moments of raising a bent or lifting a ridge beam, silence was law. The boss carpenter called out single-syllable commands, and every man responded. The system was as tight as a ship's crew calling sail. Heave, hold, set, drop. A single shout from the wrong man could throw off the rhythm and bring a bent crashing back. Pennsylvania farm journals from 1855 onward describe boss carpenters who fined men for speaking out of turn during a lift. The fine was usually paid in cider after the work was done, but the rule was absolute. Pennsylvania German communities developed a signal vocabulary that mixed English and Pennsylvania Dutch, so outsiders could not follow. The signals had to be short. Men on a pike pole could not process more than one syllable at a time when straining against 4,000 pounds. The choreography was a kind of music. Heave, breath, set breath. The whole bent walked up in time to the boss carpenter's voice. Modern construction sites use almost identical signaling on tower crane lifts today. They did not invent it. They borrowed it from farmers of the 1850s. Number 6, the pre-dawn arrival. A barn raising started in the dark. Men arrived between 4 and 5 in the morning, walking in from farms 3 and 4 miles away with their tools wrapped in burlap. They drank coffee by lantern light, stretched their backs, and were on the timber pile before the sun cleared the ridge. The reason was simple. Summer raisings happened in July and August, the only months when the corn was high enough to skip a day of work, but the harvest had not started. Daylight had to be stretched. Every minute before sunrise was a minute the host could deliver in mid-afternoon when the roof needed to go on. Diaries from Ohio Amish farms record men leaving home at 3 in the morning with lanterns, walking 5 miles cross-country, and arriving in time to eat breakfast at the trestle table. The pre-dawn arrival was a quiet declaration of commitment. You were not doing the host a favor. You were investing in a community where your own barn might burn next year, and the early hour was your interest payment. By the time the sun came up, the foundation was scraped clean and the first bent lay assembled. Number 5, the cider barrel tradition. On non-Amish raisings, particularly in early 19th century rural America, a barrel of hard cider sat at one end of the trestle tables. Men drank steadily through the day. By 1830, the average American adult was consuming roughly 7 gallons of hard cider a year, and barn raisings were one of the days that average got reached quickly. The cider was not just refreshment, it was payment. A host who served weak cider got a weak raising. Strong cider, often supplemented with a jug of rye whiskey for the boss carpenter, signaled that the work was valued. Among Amish and conservative Mennonite communities, the cider barrel was replaced by switchel, a non-alcoholic mix of water, vinegar, molasses, and ginger that hydrated and replenished electrolytes far better than plain water. Modern sports nutritionists have since analyzed switchel and found it remarkably similar to commercial electrolyte drinks. The drink at the raising said something important. Your sweat is worth something, and we are paying you in liquid that you will remember. Once the bents were vertical and the rafters set, the roof boarding crew took over. These were the youngest men on the site, those with the best balance and the most pride. They scrambled across the rafters with bundles of 1-inch pine boards on their shoulders, nailing them down to form the deck under the shingles. By tradition, raising the roof boards was a race. The crew on the north slope competed against the crew on the south slope. Diaries from Lancaster County in the 1870s record raisings where the south slope crew finished 15 minutes ahead and demanded extra pie at supper. The losing crew good-naturedly handed it over. The race was not just sport, it was speed control. A raising needed to finish before sundown, and the roof was the last hard task. Turning it into competition meant every nail landed faster. By the time the last board was nailed and the last shingle laid, the roof boarding crew was as exhausted as the pike pole men, but they wore the satisfaction of having sealed the building against rain in a single afternoon. Number 3, the mortise and tenon joinery. Here is the secret modern construction has been trying to copy for 40 years. Every joint in a traditional American barn was a mortise and tenon. A square hole, the mortise species was chiseled into the receiving timber. A matching square peg, the tenon was shaped from the end of the joining timber. The two pieces slid together and locked with a wooden trunnel through both. Researchers at Cornell University's Wood Products Lab tested mortise and tenon joints against modern bolted timber connections. The mortise and tenon outperformed every modern fastener under both static and dynamic load. The reason is geometry. A mortise and tenon distributes stress across the entire wood surface of the joint, not just through a single point of contact like a bolt or screw. Under earthquake-level shaking, the joint flexes. Under sustained weight, it tightens. The technique itself dates back to ancient Egypt, but American barn carpenters refined it for hardwood timbers and humid climates. The barns they built in 1850 are still standing. The bolted steel buildings put up in 1990 are already failing. We have spent millions on engineering studies to figure out what farmers with broadaxes knew by hand. Mortise is why their barns refuse to die. The last timber to go up was the ridgepole, the long horizontal beam running the length of the roof at its peak. When the ridgepole was set and pegged, the building was officially raised. In Pennsylvania German tradition, the host's wife climbed up and tied a small evergreen branch, usually pine or hemlock, to the ridgepole. This ceremony, called the Richtfest in the Old Country, was 800 years old. The branch signaled that no man had died during the raising, that the building was blessed, and that the family was thanking the woods for the timber. Diaries from Berks County in the 1860s describe entire crowds falling silent as the evergreen went up. The boss carpenter would shout a single word of completion, and a cheer would rise from 80 throats at once. Some communities followed the evergreen with a recited blessing. Others fired a shotgun into the air. Either way, the ridgepole ceremony marked the moment when a pile of timber became a barn. A picture of the raised frame with the evergreen on the peak still hangs in family homes today. And in first place, number one, the communal sunset supper. The number one barn-raising secret was the supper at the end. After the last shingle was nailed, the last peg driven, and the trestle tables had been cleared and reset, for the third time that day, the entire community sat down together. 80 men, 30 women, 50 children, all eating the same food at the same long table under the same setting sun. Pennsylvania Mennonite diaries describe these suppers running until 10 p.m. by lantern light, with fiddle music, square dancing in the open barn that had stood empty just hours before, and children falling asleep in their parents' laps. The supper was not just a meal, it was the ledger. Every man who had worked was now repaid in mood, drink, conversation, and the unspoken assurance that when his own barn needed raising, the same faces would appear in his yard at dawn. Sociologists studying these communities in the 20th century called this the gift economy in its most refined form. No money changed hands, no contracts were signed. The supper was the contract, and it was unbreakable. The barn stood overhead, raised in a single day, but the bond it represented stood for generations. That sunset meal was the secret to all the rest. 20 secrets. One barn, one day, one community. The buildings still stand from Pennsylvania to Iowa, weather-grayed and proud, holding up under storms that would tear apart anything we build today. Walk under a 180-year-old barn beam, and you can still see the chalk marks, still see the trunnels, still see the hex sign. That is not just construction. That is a township's signature boadshitchurch in oak. We traded all of this for power tools and overnight shipping, and we lost something we may never get back. Tell me in the comments which secret surprised you most. Ask your grandparents if they remember anyone in your family who could swing a broadaxe, because they probably did. They probably raised a barn.